Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Starting with the breaking news alert, Steve, have to provide an update following on from our Windows 11 discussion from last week. It turns out I was, being a bit premature in my criticism. So just to recap, I was complaining mostly about the fact that Windows 11 compatibility and parallels hit a couple of roadblocks and prevented me from using it on my M1 Mac here. And then Parallels thankfully ran a patch and fixed it all up. And what I thought was amusing was that, first it was the TPM chip. It said, sorry, you can't, Windows detected it and said, sorry, no, you can't run this version of Windows. Parallels patches it. Then it says, sorry, Apple Silicon isn't supported in its in the engineering message that came up. And then Parallels patches that. And now it's working fine. I'm getting the updates and the builds again and all that sort of stuff. So I was like, oh, great. That solves some problems. But I just feel like, again, I just want to revisit the fact that it's all unnecessarily clunky. And I just would have thought, I know Microsoft probably has some ego involved in the sense that they probably aren't that interested in Windows running on Macs, for instance, and Apple obviously doesn't care. But, I just thought, I still think it should have been done a little bit smoother than what it was.
Well, it's true, but, I guess what this shows us is, nothing was fixed at the Windows end. Parallels fixed what they needed to, and life goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just happy that I can, still run both systems. But, I might end up having to upgrade to an M1X MacBook in a couple of months' time just to beef the thing up so I can run both because, I'm tragic that way in terms of purchasing these things. All right, just another quick thing to touch on. We're recording this on September 11th, and obviously it's the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks, and obviously there's a lot of coverage of that at the moment. Just wanted to touch on that briefly, and obviously I can have a clear memory of when I first became aware of it. Obviously it happened overnight Australian time, so I woke up, turned on the TV, the Today Show came on, and blaring in the headlines in the background just had America under attack. And I was like, my first reaction was, what, did a country invade them or something? And then obviously very quickly after they started reporting what it was about, it was quite shocking. And it was really hard not to just be glued to the TV as events unfolded. And I guess by the time I saw it, most of the live stuff had kind of happened, with the buildings falling and all that sort of stuff. But I just remember it's a very clear memory of just how somber and the mood that it kind of generated for everyone, even just during the workday and all of that. It was you couldn't really think about anything else.
Yeah, when I was a kid, they used to say, everyone knew where they were when JFK got shot. And I think this is very similar for us. For me personally, I was working in a TV station and I started on the early shift, so I'd gone to bed early, didn't know what had happened till I turned on the radio on the way to work, and I could hear them going, this is unbelievable, and, this is incredible, and I still couldn't understand what they were talking about. I got to work and I was working on the Today Show actually for Channel 9, and I saw a lot of video that day. It was something that I'll never forget.
Absolutely. Just one other quick thing before we get into our main topics too. We spoke about Joe Rogan's COVID diagnosis the other week. I subsequently checked out a couple of excerpts from his podcast in which he inevitably was obviously going to talk about it the next time around. And this is probably going to feed into our first topic anyway, but what really struck me is that there's a component of his discussion around not trusting mainstream media with the narrative that they're telling you, especially in relation to COVID news, etc. And I don't necessarily disagree with that particular point in general, because I'm actually quite dismayed at the state of mainstream media, because I'm sure that you'd appreciate too that I grew up in an environment where it was trusted, it was the centralized place to get your truth and your information, and just to see it degenerate the way it has in recent years has been quite disappointing. So I kind of understand that point, but the thing that really is remarkable is that why should we listen to him and his alternative narrative of what's going on? Because quite frankly, he's just a guy speaking. Great, he's got a huge platform with millions of people listening to him, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's an authority on the topic or is in any way providing good advice to anyone on anything. And I found that kind of sort of contradictory. So he's making that point about not trusting the mainstream media, but I don't think anything he's saying is necessarily trustworthy either.
Well, yeah, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. You know, there was traditional media. I think traditional media is dead and buried. There's now opinion media. There is some reporting. But I guess this is the segue into our sort of next topic, because I totally agree. You know, as soon as you can be one person, you can be an ordinary person. But if you've got 1 million people that you're speaking to, you're not an ordinary person anymore.
I think that it's important to understand that you'd have to have that realization at some point, because, you know, if I can imagine, you know, starting off, you know, 10 people are listening. So, you know, you probably don't think what you're saying is important to anyone. But when you do get such a huge following, that's when you have to understand that what you're saying, even if you're not sure you know what you're saying, is going to be, you know, reacted to in a stronger way than before.
Completely agree. I mean, let's just use this as an example, and not to rake over old coals, but he comes out and says something this week, you know, about trustworthiness of the media, and 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago he said something that was just decidedly dodgy. I mean, you know,
yeah.
you can't be a reliable source of information one day and unreliable the next. Well, you can actually. There's, you know, but it just means that on the sum, you're unreliable.
Yeah, well, you've got to be consistent in your reliability or something like that.
Exactly, you have to be consistently reliable. Yeah, if every third or fourth piece of information you put out, or even every 10th piece of information you put out is wrong or dodgy, then you're unreliable. There's no, I'm mostly right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess that kind of plays in again. We'll go into our first topic here, which is around which we've already been sort of touching on, which is why so few people trust the news media anymore. And obviously, there was an article which we were reading through, and I guess this is sort of a broadly themed, I guess mostly understood thing, that there was a transition towards, a 24-hour news cycle, emphasis on trying to figure out how to replace existing funding models for news. Whereas, you know, in the past there was kind of an established setup where the news could run at a loss as long as other parts of the business were making lots of money and could support it. There's kind of been this shift towards the fact that it's had to kind of find a way to support itself, which inevitably means that in order to generate the advertising revenue to fund itself, it has to change the nature of what it's reporting and the way it reports it. And if you combine that with things like the internet, social media, an attention deficit disorder sort of, kind of approach with the fact of how social media works, and that, you know, clickbait headlines have to be generated, and the news has to be pumped out so quickly to catch up that, you know, things aren't fact-checked, aren't properly researched, etc. That's where you start to get the holes in the way the mainstream media works, and you just sit there and you know that, like, there's quite obvious examples now where you're sitting there watching something and you know it's not right. Or they've taken a biased point of view, and I guess the other throwing in too is that injection of opinion into news coverage, where news coverage should really just be, you know, just the facts kind of thing, but you know, opinion is kind of twisted into it now.
Well, opinion's the main driver. So the news cycle's 24 hours. So media companies now feel they have to compete across 24 hours. News doesn't happen as fast as 24 hour, or, you know, there's not enough news of interest to fill 24 hours. So, of course, what we do is we fill, you know, 19 and a half of those hours, or maybe even 23 and a half of those hours with opinion. Yeah. And it's cheap and it's easy and it outrages us or makes us feel good. Yeah. And that's what drives the cycle. And it's a tragedy, because opinion is not news. Opinion is just opinion, and really anyone's opinion, even if it's wrong, is as good as anyone else's.
Yeah, exactly.
So, for instance, one of the things I've seen in the last 20 years is I still read the Australian newspaper, the last broadsheet in Australia. And that horrifies a lot of people because they think that somehow identifies me politically. And I quite often have to say to them, well, listen, if I read the opinion, I'd have headaches and nosebleeds every day. But the thing is News Corp is actually internationally syndicated. And what you will find amongst the opinion is still old-fashioned reporting of events, very accurately, old school, and without opinion. And that's why I value that particular masthead, because I can go through and I can read things that are actually happening in other places without opinion. Of course, that's only about 30% of the paper now. The other 60% is people screaming at each other and, pointing fingers and whining and moaning and those sorts of things. So, if you read a paper from cover to cover, which I used to do, it's very hard to do that these days unless you've got some sort of talk-back mindset and all you want to do is throw bricks at the TV.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess another aspect to this, and I guess this is probably we're probably going to slowly start transitioning into our second topic for today too, is that there's a component of this where I guess the mastheads in the past for news media were set up in a centralized environment. So the technology at the time, printing press, news broadcast was around technology to do with radio towers, etc. There was only certain companies that had the capacity to be able to access that technology, and as a result, it was kind of centralized around certain corporations and outlets being able to deliver through those technologies. So all the news got funneled, infamously in America, it's always the three big networks. They all broadly kind of said the same thing, and you could trust it, and that was in the past, and it was around the centralized model of what's going on. What the internet's effectively done has decentralized it. In not fully, not all the way, as we'll get to, but the decentralized impact of it is that now anyone can get in front of a camera and report the news. And I've seen plenty of YouTube people, spouting their reactions and opinions on, the news of the day, and whether it's Fauci and his Wuhan lab research and funding, and or the erosion of civil liberties relating to anything to do with COVID, and all these kinds of reactions. And in some cases, I think they're overreactions. There's no balanced approach or single source of truth, but the mechanism to set up a decentralized accurate source of news is not there, because we're sort of halfway in between the centralized model and what this eventual decentralized model will be. And now we've just got a mess at the moment of not knowing what we can listen to.
Completely agree. And I still, for the life of me, do not understand why governments around the world are not, identifying Facebook as a publisher for interest. Facebook is not singularly, responsible for what's happened. The internet totally, and the way we consume our news, and probably, the way that as humans we're susceptible to, access things that we want and things that make us feel a certain way as we consume what should be just objective news, are all part of the equation. But when you've got platforms that allow individuals to basically push whatever sort of point of view that they want, and you've got an echo chamber algorithm that amplifies that, it's just not good enough. And I think the other point that was made in that article that was very interesting as well is that people see the news as biased, and they see it as either a left-wing publication or a right-wing publication, and they don't realise that really all it is media entertainment, thinly disguised as information, and it's certainly not reliable information. And really, when you look at some of these people, I'm not even sure it's real entertainment.
Exactly, apart from outrage generation.
That's right. So, and I do think that the social platforms and Google as well just allow it to be too easy to get away with these things. And then we have laws in Australia, like we did this week, where if somebody posts a comment on your post, you could be liable. And I still don't understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess sort of moving it along too, if we explore that concept of decentralisation a bit more, there was that other sort of essay that we were reading in relation to blockchain technology and peer-to-peer kind of technologies sort of like transitioning from what would be considered Web 2.0, which is now, and what we're kind of talking about here, to a 3.0 version where if you think of a true decentralized system, that's where the kind of checks and balances can come in. So there isn't an overall centralized authority, but the technology enables a system where everyone contributes to the it's not the right word, but the regulation of what will work properly, which I actually thought was kind of interesting. And, to bastardize an analogy here, I mean, everyone knows what Bitcoin is. So it's kind of that principle where, the bank got taken out of the equation for being able to do currency transactions and financial transactions. So if you start to apply that across the board using that kind of technology, that the potential for, I guess, providing a better alternative system could potentially be there if it's implemented properly. But it's the idea that of the technology has moved us along to a point where you can't rely on the centralized sort of model anymore, because that's like old school technology. New school technology puts all of this in the hands of everybody, whereas in the past it didn't. So there needs to be a different way of being able to manage all of this stuff, so that, we can still maintain some sort of, functioning civil democracy or something like that.
Well, this is absolutely right. And it's a really, really interesting model potentially, say, for regulating, communications on the internet. So, for instance, blockchain model, I can probably still conceal my identity, but validate my identity at the same time. And therefore, if there is a news event, I can show where I got my news from. I can show or link to the sources that are forming my opinion. So I can validate my claim potentially in this. Where I think this sort of model will fall down in the short term is people adopting it. It'd be great for legitimate news sources to use something like a blockchain sort of validation method, but nobody who has anything to hide would want it, because in blockchain everybody can see. So if you're doing something dodgy, or if you've got a particular axe to grind, or if you're just making up news, potentially a system like this would out you, because you wouldn't be able to claim any sort of currency in information. So it's a very interesting,
and that might be a potential virtue, maybe, in that sense, for anyone wanting that level of transparency.
Oh, exactly. So you would think that I don't know how the system would work. Someone would need to work out the system of how you could validate news or currency.
Yeah.
And opinion via that. You could literally show or document how you came to your opinion, which I think a lot of people, on the internet who comment on vaccines or climate change or anything else, diets, nutrition, that sort of thing, don't have any way to validate their claims, let alone even tell us what their qualifications are or why they might even know something on the topic. So it would be quite an interesting way for maybe media to reclaim, I guess, an objective point of view from the wider medium. But we'll have to wait and see how this would come out.
And maybe potentially giving rise to legitimate other voices too, in that, because they would have access to the same sort of technology to be able to do it.
Well, that's right. But even if you're someone like Josh Rogan, for instance, like you would assume that he would, somewhere plug into this bit chain and effectively his points of view, his stories, what he's commenting on, you'll be able to see where that story came from, what was the original source of this story, and then what were all his episodes that relate to that story as well. So you'll see him flip-flop perhaps, and if you go back to validating yourself. So it could be quite an interesting and useful tool.
Well, I did I did enjoy the analogy that was in that essay, where they basically use the anthill analogy, where goodness comes from the sum of its parts, all the little ants contributing their little bit, which is a kind of a positive, optimistic view of how it could potentially work.
Well, that's right, validating, and perhaps it's even a way longer term to stop the really insidious trolling that occurs on the internet. We can only hope.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve, I might wrap it up there. Quite a bit that we got through there, and I guess just have to go back to watching stuff on the internet. It seems like I've still got several weeks of lockdown to keep consuming content, so who knows what else I might be able to unearth at this point.
Hang in there, you'll get through it, and it'll go back to some sort of new normal sometime.
Absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, SciTechCulture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, our RSS feeds, and watch us on any and all of your devices. And we greatly appreciate your visits to our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.